Hello, dear listeners. A very warm welcome to another literary journey through the ages. Today we will dive into a story that transports us to imperial Brazil in 1847, where the aroma of freshly harvested coffee mixed with the sighs of a love that defied all social conventions. Among the golden coffee plantations of the Paraíba Valley, we will meet Eduardo, a widowed duke in search of redemption, and Isabel, a young woman of humble origins whose pure heart would transform not only a farm, but an entire way of seeing life. A story where true nobility is not measured by titles, but by the courage to follow one's heart. Tell me in the comments, from which city are you joining us on this journey? Your presence makes this narrative even more special. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. It helps us a lot to continue bringing these stories that warm the soul. Fazenda Santa Isabel, Paraíba Valley, province of Rio de Janeiro, Imperial Brazil. Year 1847. The carriage advanced slowly along the dirt road, its wheels carving grooves in the orange dust that the setting sun gilded like stardust. Through the misty windowpane, Eduardo de Bragança e Silva contemplated the familiar landscape he had not seen in 2 long years, the rolling hills covered in coffee plantations, the stone fences that demarcated centuries-old properties, and in the distance, like a mirage of peace, the towers of the main house of Fazenda Santa Isabel. At 36, the Duke carried on his shoulders the weight of a premature widowhood that had stolen from him not only his beloved wife, but also his ability to dream. Caterina had departed as flowers do, suddenly, taken by the yellow fever that had ravaged the court the previous winter, and Eduardo had fled that city of stone and mourning, seeking in the lands of his childhood the balm his wounded soul so desperately needed. The colonial mansion emerged from among the eucalyptus trees like an architectural embrace, its sash windows reflecting the last rays of the sun. The purple bougainvilleas that adorned the veranda had grown wild in the master's absence, creating a romantic veil over the white columns. The air tasted of earth dampened by the afternoon rain and the sharp scent of coffee in bloom. Dona Josefa appeared on the porch before the carriage even came to a complete stop. 25 years of dedication to the Bragança e Silva family had shaped in that silver-haired woman a maternal intuition that transcended blood ties. Her hurried steps on the Paraíba wood planks echoed like the beats of an anxious heart. "My boy," she whispered, when Eduardo stepped down from the carriage, using the same affectionate expression from when he was 10 and returning from boarding school. Her arms enveloped him with the tenderness of one who embraces a son returning from war. Francisco Tavares emerged from the shadows of the garden, wiping his hands on a handkerchief and adjusting his straw hat. 20 years managing these lands had made him more than an employee. He was a guardian of the prosperity that sprouted from that blessed soil. His brown eyes shone with a restrained joy upon seeing his employer. "Your Excellency," he greeted with a respectful bow, but Eduardo extended his hand with his usual cordiality. "Francisco, my old friend, how is our dear Santa Isabel?" "As prosperous as ever, Your Grace. The coffee plantations have produced beyond expectations this harvest, and we have French buyers interested in our special quality." Eduardo nodded, but his eyes were already wandering through the gardens where his mother had once cultivated roses. Now only a few seedlings resisted among the weeds, like forgotten tears in time. That sight touched his chest with a sweet melancholy, pregnant with memories he did not yet know how to face. Night fell upon the farm with the softness of a black velvet cloak, dotted with the first stars. In the library that had been his youthful refuge, Eduardo leafed through business letters, while the aroma of freshly brewed coffee that Dona Josefa had brought him mingled with the smell of leather from the old books. Through the half-open window, the distant murmur of workers returning from the coffee fields and the gentle tinkling of animal bells reached him. It was then that an anguished neigh cut through the serenity of the night, coming from the direction of the stables, a sound of animal distress that made Eduardo leave his cup on the table and go to the window. Through the gloom, he made out a delicate figure moving among the shadows of the corral, her calm gestures contrasting with the agitation of the horses. What would happen there on that night scented with jasmine and promises would be the first thread of a web that would forever change the destiny of those 2 lonely hearts. The dawn broke, tinged with pink and gold over the hills of the Paraíba Valley, and Eduardo awoke with a strange restlessness in his chest. The anguished neigh from the previous night still echoed in his ears like a call he had not been able to decipher. He dressed quickly and headed to the stables, where an extraordinary scene awaited his eyes. Isabel Tavares was kneeling beside the mare, Esperanza, her delicate hands moving with the precision of a dancer over the animal's distended belly. At 19, she possessed that serene beauty of women who find their strength in simplicity. Brown hair tied in simple braids, skin gilded by the farm sun, and eyes that reflected an ancient wisdom, as if she carried within her the secrets of the earth. "Easy, my dear," she murmured to the mare, her voice as sweet as wild honey. "Your baby wants to see the world, but we need to help him arrive safely." Eduardo remained at the entrance of the stable, hypnotized by the scene. Isabel had prepared an herbal infusion that perfumed the air with aromas of chamomile and rosemary. Her hands, small but sure, massaged the animal with circular movements, while her lips whispered words of encouragement that seemed like healing spells. The mare relaxed under that magical touch, and in a few minutes a foal with a golden coat came into the world with the delicacy of a morning miracle. Isabel smiled, a smile that lit up the entire stable as if the sun itself had entered, and wrapped the newborn in clean blankets. "Good morning, little prince," she said to the foal, who was already trying to stand on its trembling legs. It was only then that she noticed Eduardo's presence. She blushed intensely and made a move to rise in a curtsy, but he stopped her with a gentle gesture. "Please don't get up. What I have just witnessed is more sacred than any protocol," he said, approaching slowly. "How did you know Esperanza needed help?" Isabel lowered her eyes, her cheeks still flushed with shyness. "The animals speak to us, Your Excellency, when we learn to listen. Yesterday afternoon she was restless, refusing her feed. Her dilated pupils and heavy breathing told me the birth would not be easy." Eduardo knelt beside her, admiring the delicacy with which she treated mother and child. "Where did you learn these techniques? From a veterinarian?" "My mother taught me before she went to be with God. She used to say that the women in our family had the gift of healing, which came from our indigenous grandmothers who knew the secrets of nature." Isabel caressed the foal's muzzle. "Father Antonio lent me books on natural medicine, and I just feel what the animals need." The simplicity of those words touched Eduardo in an inexplicable way. There was something in the presence of this young woman that brought him a peace he had not experienced in months. Perhaps it was the serenity of her gestures, or the way the animals calmed at her touch, but he felt for the first time since Katerina's death that his heart was beginning to beat to a different rhythm. "What do you plan to name him?" he asked, indicating the foal. Isabel raised her eyes and met his. For a moment time seemed suspended, as if the entire farm were holding its breath. "Esperanza, hope, like her mother," she replied. "But if it's a male, perhaps recomeço, new beginning." The word echoed in Eduardo's heart with the force of a revelation. A new beginning. Yes, perhaps that was exactly what his soul was searching for in these blessed lands. They spent the morning talking about the farm animals, with Isabel showing him the special care she gave to each one. Eduardo discovered that she had created a small veterinary hospital in the old grain storehouse, where she treated injured or sick animals using medicinal herbs and a great deal of affection. When the sun reached its zenith, Francisco appeared at the stable looking for his daughter. "Isabel, your mother is worried." He stopped upon seeing Eduardo there. "Forgive me, Your Excellency, I didn't know you were here." "It's no problem, Francisco. Your daughter has just saved Esperanza and her foal. She is a remarkable young woman." Paternal pride shone in the administrator's eyes. Isabel does have a special way with animals. Ever since she was little, Eduardo observed the interaction between father and daughter, noticing the mutual respect and sincere love that united them. There was something in that family that awakened a deep nostalgia in him, the simplicity of true affection, so different from the calculated relationships of the court. "I would like Miss Isabel to accompany me on a visit to the coffee plantations tomorrow morning," he said impulsively. "I need to get to know our property better, and I imagine she can show me things that have gone unnoticed." Isabel exchanged an uncertain glance with her father, who nodded slightly. "It would be an honor, Your Excellency," she murmured without raising her eyes. As Eduardo walked away towards the main house, his heart was beating rapidly in his chest. There was something about that young woman that had awakened in his soul a feeling he thought long dead, a curiosity about another human being, a desire to know the thoughts and dreams hidden behind those serene eyes. And as Isabel returned home, carrying the scent of medicinal herbs on her hands, a question echoed in her heart, like the morning song of the great Kiskadese. Could it be possible that this chance encounter in the stables was the first step of a journey that would change their lives forever? The days that followed flowed like crystal clear water over polished stones, each morning bringing new encounters that deepened the invisible bonds between Eduardo and Isabel. The tour of the coffee plantations turned into a daily ritual. She riding the gentle mare Violetta, he on his sorrel horse Trovador, traversing the trails that wound through the coffee plants like green arteries pulsing with life. Isabel proved to be an extraordinary companion. She knew every corner of those lands as if they were extensions of her own soul. She knew where the thrushes built their nests, in which clearings the wild orchids bloomed, and why certain areas produced beans of superior quality. Her knowledge, acquired through patient observation and respectful coexistence with nature, impressed Eduardo more than any academic treatise. "Look here, Your Excellency," she said one morning, pointing to a section where the coffee trees had more vigorous foliage. "Papa discovered that this area receives a special breeze at dawn, which brings moisture from the valley. The beans from here have a sweeter flavor." Eduardo dismounted and examined the coffee cherries, confirming her observation. The dedication of Francisco and Isabel to the farm touched him deeply. There was a genuine love for the land that transcended contractual obligations. "Your father is a wise man," he commented, "and you have inherited that wisdom." The blush that colored Isabel's cheeks at that moment made Eduardo's heart race. How could such a simple young woman provoke such intense feelings in him? Every gesture of hers, every word spoken in that melodious voice, every furtive glance she gave him created waves of emotion he had thought impossible after the loss of Caterina. The afternoons found them at the natural lookout point on the highest part of the farm, from where the entire valley unfolded, like a green mosaic dotted with the white houses of neighboring properties. There, sitting on the sun-warmed rocks, they would talk at length as the sky was tinged with the colors of twilight. It was during one of these meetings that Eduardo spoke of Caterina for the first time. "She was a wonderful woman," he said, his eyes lost on the horizon. "We met at the court during a ball. She danced like an angel, and her laugh lit up entire ballrooms." Isabel listened in silence, her hands clasped in her lap, respecting the pain she perceived in his voice. "Yellow fever took her in 3 days," Eduardo continued, his voice choked with emotion. "I could no longer remain in those places where we had been happy. Every room, every garden, every corner held memories that suffocated me. The pain of longing is like a flooding river," Isabel said softly. "No matter how much we try to dam it, it finds ways to flow. Perhaps it is necessary to let it flow until it finds its natural course." The wisdom of those words, spoken with touching simplicity, moved Eduardo deeply. In them was an intuitive understanding of human suffering that no counselor at court had been able to offer him. "And you, Isabel," he asked, "what are your dreams, your desires?" She smiled shyly, toying with a wildflower she had picked along the way. "I dream of having a place where I can care for all the injured animals in the region, a place with green pastures, a crystal-clear stream, spacious corrals." Her eyes shone with the vision she described, "where every creature can be treated with affection until it regains its health. And why don't you realize that dream right here on the farm?" "Oh, it wouldn't be appropriate, Your Excellency." She lowered her eyes. "I am only the administrator's daughter. I have no rights to these lands." The naivety of that answer broke Eduardo's heart. How could he explain to Isabel that, little by little, she was becoming the owner of something much more precious than land? She was irreversibly conquering his heart. The evenings began to bring invitations for dinner at the modest but welcoming home of the Tavares family. Donna Maria, Isabel's mother, was a woman of rare kindness, whose culinary skills transformed simple ingredients into delicacies that reminded Eduardo of the flavors of his childhood. Francisco became increasingly at ease in his employer's presence, sharing stories of the farm and plans for future harvests. But it was Isabel who dominated those evenings with her luminous presence. She served the table with natural grace, her delicate gestures making the simple crockery beautiful. When she embroidered by the kerosene lamp, Eduardo would lose himself watching the movement of her agile fingers, creating thread flowers on the white fabric. One night, Isabel hummed a popular tune softly as she cleared the dishes. Her voice, sweet as the song of a musician wren, made Eduardo close his eyes and feel for the first time since Caterina's death that his heart was once again beating to the rhythm of hope. "What a beautiful voice you have," he said when she finished. "Mama taught me that song when I was a child." Isabel smiled. She used to say that music is medicine for the soul. And as the Tavares family bid him farewell on that jasmine-scented night, Eduardo walked back to the main house with the growing certainty that something extraordinary was blooming in his chest. something that dangerously resembled a feeling he dared not name, but that warmed his soul like the first sun after a long winter. With each step on the dewy grass, a question hammered in his heart. Could it be possible for love to be reborn from the ashes of grief, stronger and truer than ever before? Spring arrived at Fazenda Santa Isabel like a symphony of colors and scents, awakening in the sleeping earth the eternal miracle of rebirth. Eduardo woke one September morning with a different kind of restlessness in his chest, as if his heart sensed that this day would bring events capable of forever altering the course of his existence. Isabel appeared before him during breakfast with a special sparkle in her eyes, her cheeks flushed with barely contained excitement. "Your Excellency," she said, making a small curtsy, "I would like to show you a surprise. Something that Papa and I prepared especially for you." Eduardo set his coffee cup on the table, intrigued by the anxiety he perceived in her voice. "A surprise? And may I know what it is?" "I would prefer it to be a discovery," Isabel smiled, with that shy manner that so enchanted him. "Could you accompany me to the side garden?" They walked together along the stone paths that bordered the main house, and Eduardo noticed that Isabel seemed to be struggling to contain an overflowing joy. Her steps were quicker than usual, and she occasionally glanced back to see if he was following. When they rounded the corner that led to the garden where his mother had once cultivated roses, Eduardo stopped abruptly, emotion choking his throat. The garden had been resurrected. Where once only weeds and wild thorns grew, there now stood a paradise of roses in full bloom. Roses as white as morning snow, as red as first love, as yellow as sunbeams, as pink as a maiden's cheeks, all arranged in perfectly designed beds, separated by white stone paths that wound among the flowers like rivers of light. In the center of the garden, a small soapstone fountain poured crystal-clear water, and around it, cast-iron benches invited contemplation. Jasmine vines embraced the columns of a pergola, where climbing roses created a fragrant natural ceiling. Eduardo advanced slowly through the reawakened garden, each step a rediscovery of buried memories. There was the rose bush his mother had planted when he was born, now majestic and in bloom. There the bed of yellow roses she used to say were the angel's favorites. And in the back, protected by a low bamboo fence, the century-old rosebush that had come from Portugal, with the first Bragança e Silvas. How did you manage to do this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Isabel approached slowly, her hands nervously clasped. "Papa saved all the seedlings he could when the garden began to be lost. He replanted them in a special bed behind our house and cared for them all these years, waiting for you to return." Her voice became a whisper. "I just helped him replant them here and added some new varieties I got from the neighbors." Eduardo sat on one of the benches, overwhelmed by an emotion he couldn't name. It was gratitude, yes, but also something deeper, the recognition that this extraordinary young woman had returned to his life not just a garden, but the very possibility of beauty and hope. "Why did you do this for me?" he asked, lifting his eyes to meet hers. Isabel took another step closer, her cheeks tinged with the blush of shyness and the courage of her heart. Because when you returned to the farm, you brought with you a sadness that pained our hearts too. Papa used to say that a good man like you shouldn't carry the weight of longing alone." She hesitated, then continued with a firmer voice. "And I wanted to give you something that would bring the light back to your eyes." Eduardo rose slowly and walked towards her. The scent of the roses mingled with the soft aroma emanating from Isabel's hair, creating an atmosphere of magic that seemed to suspend time. "Isabel," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "do you know what this gesture means to me?" She raised her eyes to meet his, and in that gaze Eduardo read a truth that made his heart race. She also felt that inexplicable attraction, that invisible current that bound them beyond any social convention. "It means," he continued, drawing closer, "that you have managed to do something I thought impossible. You have given me back the ability to see beauty in the world." Isabel lowered her eyes, but Eduardo gently touched her chin, making her lift her face again. "Look at me, my dear," he requested. "I need you to know something that has been growing in my heart since the first day I saw you caring for Esperanza in the stables." The world seemed to fall silent around them. Even the birds ceased their singing, as if all of nature awaited the words Eduardo was about to speak. "I have fallen in love with you, Isabel. Deeply, irremediably. This was not what I expected when I returned to the farm, but you have awakened in my soul feelings I thought were buried forever." A single tear rolled down Isabel's cheek, shining like a pearl in the morning sun. "Your Excellency, I am not worthy of—" "No," he interrupted gently. "It is not a matter of worthiness. It is a matter of the heart. And my heart has chosen you, with your kindness, your wisdom, your beauty that comes from within." Isabel trembled like a leaf in the wind, torn between happiness and the fear of the consequences of this impossible love. "I also," she whispered, so softly it sounded more like a sigh, "I also feel something special for you. Something that grows with each day, each conversation, each shared glance." Eduardo took her hands in his, feeling how they trembled like frightened birds. "Then allow me to court you properly," he said. "I want to do things the right way, respecting you and your family." "I will go slowly, my dear," he whispered, approaching her gently, "because you are too precious to be treated with haste." And he leaned in to kiss her lips with infinite tenderness, a kiss that tasted of future promises and blooming roses, while the entire garden seemed to blossom even more around that love, born as pure as the morning and as true as the earth that sustained them. When they parted, Eduardo rested his forehead against hers, breathing in the sweet scent of her skin mixed with that of the flowers surrounding them. "Promise me one thing," he asked. "Anything," she replied, her eyes shining with happiness, "that you will never doubt what I feel for you, regardless of what others may say, of what the world may think. You are the miracle I didn't know I was waiting for." And as they walked back to the main house, hand in hand among the blooming rose bushes, they both carried in their hearts the certainty that they had just begun a journey that would change not only their lives, but the very destiny of those blessed lands. But neither Eduardo nor Isabel imagined that, at that very moment, envious eyes were watching their declaration of love from the windows of the main house, and that storms were approaching on the horizon to test the strength of that nascent feeling. The clouds had been gathering over the Paraíba Valley since mid-afternoon, creating a leaden sky that seemed to foreshadow change. Eduardo and Isabel had spent the day visiting the pastures where the pregnant mares awaited foaling season, when the first flashes of lightning tore across the horizon like divine warnings. "It looks like we're in for a strong storm," Eduardo observed, noticing how the horses grew restless under the weight of the heavy atmosphere. Isabel looked up at the darkened sky, where black clouds were moving in a threatening formation. "Esperanza is due to give birth in the next few days," she said, worried. "I wouldn't want her to be caught in the storm far from the stables." They quickly made their way to the pasture where the mare was grazing with the other brood mares. Isabel approached the animal with her usual calm, whispering reassuring words as she examined its condition. The mare's distended belly and restlessness confirmed her suspicions. "She's in labor," Isabel announced. "We need to get her to a sheltered place before the rain comes." Eduardo helped her lead Esperanza along the farm paths as the wind began to howl through the trees, bending the branches of the eucalyptus trees and making the leaves dance like desperate moths. The air carried the unmistakable scent of approaching rain, mixed with the intense fragrance of flowers that seemed to open wider on the verge of the storm. When they reached the main stables, the first heavy drops began to mark the thirsty earth, but Esperanza grew increasingly agitated, refusing to enter the covered corral. "She doesn't want to stay here," Isabel said, observing the animal's behavior. "Something is bothering her." A clap of thunder rumbled above their heads, followed by a flash of lightning that illuminated the entire farm as if it were day. Esperanza reared up, neighing in distress, and Isabel understood immediately. "The chapel," she exclaimed. "She wants to go to the old chapel. That's where she was born 5 years ago." The stone chapel stood on a nearby hill, built by the farm's first owners as a place of prayer and retreat. Masses had not been celebrated there for decades, but its solid structure offered safe shelter from the elements. Eduardo and Isabel led Esperanza along the winding path to the chapel, just as the rain began to fall violently. Thick curtains of water swept across the landscape, turning the dirt paths into muddy streams in minutes. Successive lightning bolts cut through the darkened sky, followed by thunder that made the earth tremble. The chapel's massive wooden door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior that smelled of damp stone and old candles. Eduardo lit the lamps that remained there, creating a warm, golden atmosphere. Esperanza entered calmly, as if recognizing the place, and lay down on a bed of straw that Isabel quickly improvised. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury. Powerful winds lashed the trees, and the rain beat against the chapel's window panes with the force of hail. But within those centuries-old walls, a strange peace enveloped Eduardo and Isabel as they dedicated themselves to helping Esperanza through her labor. Isabel knelt beside the mare, her experienced hands massaging the animal with gentle circular movements. Eduardo admired the serenity with which she handled such a delicate moment, her sweet voice humming a melody that seemed to calm not only Esperanza, but the entire charged atmosphere of the night. "You are extraordinary," he said softly. "You have a special gift for bringing peace where there is turmoil." Isabel smiled without looking up, her cheeks flushed from the effort and their proximity in that intimate space. "My grandmother used to say that the women of our family had healing hands," she replied. "That one only needed to listen with the heart to what beings need." A particularly intense flash of lightning lit up the entire chapel, followed by a clap of thunder that made the window panes shudder. Esperanza seemed to react to the imminent birth, her movements becoming more urgent. "It's coming," Isabel whispered. Eduardo moved closer, and together they watched the miracle unfold before their eyes. With the grace of an ancestral dance, Isabel guided the foal's birth, her steady hands receiving the new life that came into the world on a night of storm and promise. The foal was born with a coat as golden as a sunbeam, and its first movements drew emotional smiles from Eduardo and Isabel. It was a filly, perfect and vigorous, who in a few minutes was already trying to stand on her trembling legs. "What will you name her?" asked Eduardo, watching Isabel dry the filly with clean cloths. "Liberdade, freedom," she answered without hesitation. She was born on a night when the elements were unleashed with all their force, and she brought with her the promise of better days. Eduardo took Isabel's hands in his, still damp from the birth he had just witnessed. "Like me, who found my freedom in my love for you," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. The storm was beginning to lose its strength outside, but inside the chapel the air seemed charged with a different kind of electricity. Eduardo and Isabel were closer than they had ever been, united by the intimacy of having shared that sacred moment. "Isabel," he whispered, caressing her face with one hand, "I want to ask for your hand in marriage. I want to do things the right way. Speak to your father, make our love public." Isabel's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of happiness that shone like stars in the golden light of the lamps. "Eduardo," she said, speaking his name for the first time without the formal address. "Yes, my love, yes, I want to be your wife." They kissed there in the old chapel, while Esperanza and Liberdade rested after the birth, and the storm slowly moved away, leaving the air washed clean and fragrant with rain. It was a kiss that tasted of eternal promises, sealed by the blessing of those walls that had witnessed so many sacred moments over the years. When they finally parted, Eduardo made a decision that would change the course of their lives. "Tomorrow I will speak with Francisco," he said, "and then we will write to my relatives at court, announcing our engagement." Isabel nodded, but a shadow of concern crossed her eyes. "Eduardo," she said softly, "are you sure you are prepared to face the consequences? A duke marrying an administrator's daughter. It will cause a scandal." Eduardo squeezed her hands firmly. "The only scandal would be for me not to acknowledge the greatest gift life has offered me," he replied. "You are worth more than 1,000 titles of nobility, my dear. You are my true wealth." And as they waited for the storm to pass completely, embracing in the chapel scented with candles and the sweet aroma of hay, neither Eduardo nor Isabel imagined that other, far more dangerous storms were already forming on the horizon to test the strength of the love that had just declared itself eternal. The sun had dried the last puddles from the storm when an elegant carriage appeared on the main road of Fazenda Santa Isabel. It was a luxury brougham, with golden ornaments that glittered in the morning light, and 4 bay thoroughbreds whose hooves struck the ground in a military cadence that announced the arrival of someone important. Eduardo was in the main house's office, drafting a letter to Francisco to formally request Isabel's hand, when Donna Josefa knocked on the door with a worried expression. "Your Grace," she said, nervously wiping her hands on her apron, "we have a visitor. Countess Beatriz de Moraes has arrived from the court and asks to speak with your Excellency." The name hit Eduardo like a bucket of cold water. Beatriz de Moraes was an influential widow in Rio de Janeiro society, known for her calculated beauty and her social maneuvering. They had met in the salons of the court, and she had never disguised her interest in the young widowed duke. "Tell the Countess I will receive her in the main drawing room in 15 minutes, Eduardo replied, folding the letter he was writing. When he went down to the main drawing room, Eduardo found Beatriz examining the portraits of the Bragança e Silva family that adorned the walls. At 40, she maintained an aristocratic beauty that time had only refined. Black hair styled in elaborate buns, fair skin protected by the best French cosmetics, and dresses of the latest Parisian fashion that enhanced her elegant figure. "Eduardo, my dear," she exclaimed, extending a gloved hand to be kissed. "How long it has been! I was so worried about your prolonged absence from the court." "Countess Beatrice?" he greeted her formally. "What an unexpected surprise! To what do I owe the honor of your visit?" Beatrice moved through the room with the studied grace of someone who knows her own social worth, her calculating eyes taking in every detail of the decor. "Oh, my dear, I came all this way especially for you," she said, seating herself delicately in a jacaranda armchair. "Your friends at the court are terribly worried about this isolation of yours. A man of your position cannot simply disappear from society." Eduardo served tea from a silver tray, maintaining the courtesy required by social conventions, but his mind was racing to understand the true motives of her visit. "I appreciate the concern, but I am perfectly fine here on my lands," he replied. "In fact, I have never felt so renewed." Beatrice's sharp eyes caught the change in his voice, a lightness that did not exist at the court. "Renewed?" she repeated, tilting her head with feline interest. "How interesting. And to what do we owe this renewal?" At that moment, as if fate wanted to provoke a confrontation, Isabel appeared on the terrace overlooking the gardens. She carried a basket of freshly picked flowers, her loose hair shining in the sun, her simple blue cotton dress highlighting her natural beauty. Realizing that Eduardo had visitors, she made a motion to withdraw discreetly, but Beatrice had noticed the direction of Eduardo's gaze and the subtle change in his expression. "Who is that charming young woman?" she asked with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Eduardo hesitated for a moment, but then decided on the truth. "Isabel Tavares, my administrator's daughter." "Ah, how lovely," Beatrice said, but her tone carried nuances that Eduardo knew well. "I imagine she is very useful in domestic chores." The derogatory intention behind those words made Eduardo's blood boil, but he maintained his composure. "Miss Isabel is a remarkable young woman, with impressive knowledge of our property and special gifts for caring for the animals." Beatrice smiled with false sweetness. "How touching your paternal interest in your employees, Eduardo. You have always been a man with a generous heart." She paused calculatedly. "By the way, I brought some letters from your friends at the court. All are anxious for your return." She removed a bundle of letters sealed with noble crests from her velvet purse. "Baron de Santos is organizing a grand ball in December. Viscount de Petropolis wants to discuss new investments. And the Count de Vasura, well, he has some very interesting proposals regarding commercial contracts for your coffee." Eduardo leafed through the letters without enthusiasm. He knew these men and their motivations: power, money, and political influence. "I appreciate their interest, but I have no plans to return to the court anytime soon." Beatrice raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. "Don't tell me you intend to waste your youth buried in these lands. A man of your caliber, with so many opportunities waiting." There was something in the way she pronounced the word opportunities that alerted Eduardo. "What opportunities would those be, Countess?" Beatrice stood up and approached him, her voice lowering to an intimate and persuasive tone. "Eduardo, dear, I won't pretend you don't know of the interest I have always held for you. We are both widowed, of the same social class, with compatible estates. A union between us would be not only convenient but strategic." Eduardo took a step back, shocked by the frankness of the proposal. "Countess, I believe there is a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding at all," she interrupted, her eyes shining with determination. "I am a practical woman, Eduardo. I know what I want, and I go after it. And I want you." At that moment, as if drawn by a premonition, Isabel appeared at the drawing-room door carrying a pitcher of fresh water and crystal glasses. "Pardon the interruption," she said shyly. "Donna Josefa asked me to bring refreshments." Beatrice turned slowly to observe Isabel, her cold eyes scanning the young woman from head to toe in a cruel appraisal. "You needn't bother, my dear," she said with false kindness. "You surely have more important chores in the kitchen." The condescending tone and scornful look from Beatrice made Eduardo step forward, instinctively protecting Isabel. "Miss Isabel is always welcome in any room of this house," he said firmly. Beatrice's smile turned icy. "What admirable generosity," she commented, but then added with venom in her voice, "Although I hope you understand, my dear, that certain romantic fantasies are better left in novels than in reality." Isabel paled, but maintained her dignity. "Excuse me," she murmured, and left the room with her head held high. Eduardo was about to reprimand Beatrice when she approached him again, this time with a serious expression. "Eduardo, You are an intelligent man. Surely you realize that this fleeting infatuation with your employee's daughter could cause a scandal and harm your social standing. Your true friends at the court are concerned about the rumors that are already beginning to circulate. What rumors? Why, my dear, in a small society like ours, everything becomes known. Your romantic walks, your passionate gazes, some even whisper of an engagement. She shook her head with a pitiful air. It would be a shame to see a man of your lineage make a mistake that could destroy not only your reputation, but also your business. Eduardo felt a chill in his stomach. My business? The contracts with European buyers all pass through the connections of high society in Rio. A love scandal could complicate those relationships. The threat was clear, masked under a veneer of friendly concern. Eduardo understood that this was not just a social visit. Beatrice had come as an emissary of greater interests, willing to use any means to maintain the established order. "Countess," he said in a controlled voice, "I appreciate your concern, but my personal decisions are my own affair." Beatrice smiled coldly. "Naturally, my dear. I just hope you think carefully before making irreversible decisions." She headed for the door, but turned back one last time. "I will be staying at the neighboring farm for a few days, in case you change your mind about anything." As the Countess's carriage drove away in a cloud of dust, Eduardo remained on the veranda, his heart heavy. He knew that this visit was just the first move in a battle that was looming. Beatrice had not come to the farm alone. She had brought with her the full weight of social and economic pressure that could destroy his happiness with Isabel. And as he watched the silhouette of the carriage disappear around the bend in the road, Eduardo made a disturbing discovery. For the first time since falling in love, he was afraid of the future that awaited them. 3 days after Countess Beatrice's departure, Eduardo awoke to the unusual sound of multiple carriages arriving at the farm. From his bedroom window, he saw an impressive procession, 4 elegant broughams with noble crests, escorted by horsemen in impeccable uniforms, advancing up the main avenue like a royal cortege. Donna Josefa appeared at the bedroom door with an alarmed expression. "Your Grace, important visitors have arrived from the court. The Baron de Santos, the Viscount de Petropolis and the Count de Vasuras request an urgent audience with Your Excellency." Eduardo dressed quickly, his heart racing. The simultaneous presence of these 3 men could not be a coincidence. They formed the most influential core of the coffee aristocracy, controlling not only vast properties, but also the commercial connections with European buyers. In the main drawing room, the 3 nobles waited with the solemnity of a tribunal. Baron de Santos, a 60-year-old man with a graying beard and a penetrating gaze, occupied the central armchair. To his right, the Viscount de Petropolis, elegant and calculating at 50, leafed through commercial papers. To his left, the Count de Vasura, the youngest of the 3 but also the most ambitious, impatiently drummed his fingers on a side table. "Eduardo, my dear friend," greeted the Baron, rising for a formal embrace. "We regret interrupting your country stay, but urgent matters bring us here." "Gentlemen," Eduardo returned the courtesies, but sensed the tension in the air. "Please make yourselves comfortable. To what do I owe the honor of this visit?" The 3 men exchanged significant glances before the Viscount spoke. "Eduardo, we have been your friends for many years. We know your family, respect your position, and admire your intelligence. For that very reason, we feel obliged to warn you about certain concerning rumors." "Rumors?" The Count de Vasuras leaned forward, his cold eyes fixed on Eduardo. "There are whispers at court about a supposed romantic involvement between you and a young woman of humble origins. An employee's daughter, we have been informed." Eduardo felt his blood boil, but he maintained his composure. "My personal life should not be the subject of others' speculation." "Ah, my dear," sighed the Baron, "but when it comes to a duke, there is no purely personal life. Your actions reflect on our entire class, influence our businesses, and affect our commercial relationships." The Viscount opened a leather portfolio and removed official documents. "Eduardo, you know that we control the coffee export contracts to France, England, and Germany. Your beans, though excellent, depend on these connections we have built over decades. And these connections," continued the Count, "are based not only on the quality of the product, but also on the social reliability of our partners. European buyers insist on dealing only with nobles of impeccable reputation." Eduardo understood where they were going, but remained silent. "An unsuitable marriage," said the Baron slowly, "would be interpreted by the Europeans as social instability. A loss of prestige, distrust in our ability to maintain aristocratic standards. The Viscount placed the documents on the table. Here are the export contracts for the next harvest. Contracts that depend on our recommendation and approval. Contracts that represent 70% of your annual revenue. The threat was crystal clear. Eduardo examined the papers. They were indeed the documents that guaranteed the prosperity of his farm. "Gentlemen," he said in a controlled voice, "you have been my friends for years. Do you truly believe I would make decisions that would harm our class?" "That is precisely why we are here," replied the Count, "to prevent passion from blinding your reason. We know you are an honorable man, but even honorable men can make mistakes on impulse." The Baron stood up and began to pace the drawing room, his hands clasped behind his back. "Eduardo, you are 36 years old. You are young, wealthy, and influential. You can choose from dozens of young women of good family who would make excellent ducal wives. Why risk everything for a romantic whim?" "A whim?" Eduardo could not contain his indignation. "Forgive my frankness," said the Viscount, "but yes, a whim. This young woman may be charming, even special in her own way, but she lacks an aristocratic education, social connections, and the knowledge necessary to be a duchess. It would be an injustice to her to elevate her to a position for which she was not prepared." Eduardo clenched his fists. These arguments struck sensitive chords because they contained grains of truth twisted by prejudice. "And what alternative do you propose?" The three men smiled simultaneously, as if they had been waiting for that question. "Countess Beatrice de Moraes," said the Count, "is a cultured, experienced woman of impeccable lineage. A union between you would immensely strengthen your social and commercial position. She has already shown interest," added the Viscount, "and she brings a considerable dowry, as well as valuable political connections." Eduardo felt cornered, but showed no weakness. "And if I refuse this suggestion?" The ensuing silence was eloquent. The Baron sat down again, his gaze turning glacial. "Eduardo, we hope you are too sensible a man to force us to take unpleasant measures. But if you insist on this error, we will have to reconsider our business association." "The export contracts," explained the Viscount, "would be transferred to more reliable producers. Your banking connections at the court would suffer restrictions. Your political influence would drastically diminish." The Count completed the ultimatum. "In short, you would lose 60% of your annual revenue, become commercially isolated, and watch your fortune dwindle year after year." Eduardo remained silent for several long minutes, the weight of the social blackmail crushing his shoulders. He knew these men. They did not make empty threats. "How much time do I have to decide?" 48 hours, replied the Baron, standing up. "After that deadline, we will need to communicate our recommendations for the next harvest to the European buyers." The three nobles headed for the door, but the Count turned back one last time. "Eduardo, do not see this as a threat, but as an opportunity. Marry Beatrice, keep the peasant girl as a discreet distraction, and we will all benefit." The suggestion hit Eduardo like a slap in the face. Keeping Isabel as a mistress while marrying for convenience was precisely the kind of hypocrisy he despised in the aristocracy. As the carriages drove away, Eduardo remained on the veranda, watching the golden dust they raised in the air. 48 hours to choose between true love and financial security, between happiness and social convenience. For the first time since returning to the farm, Eduardo questioned whether love would be enough to face the immense power of these men who controlled his economic destiny. And a terrible question echoed in his mind. Did he have the right to drag Isabel into a battle that could destroy not only his fortune, but also the simple, happy life she had always known? In the distance, he saw Isabel walking through the gardens with her basket of flowers, oblivious to the approaching storm. At that moment, Eduardo understood that he was facing the most important decision of his life, to discover if the courage of his heart would be stronger than the fear of the consequences. Night fell on Fazenda Santa Isabel like a heavy cloak, laden with the tensions that the nobility's ultimatum had brought. Eduardo locked himself in his office, his turbulent mind struggling to find a way out of the dilemma before him. The business letters scattered on his desk constantly reminded him of the power his visitors wielded over his financial future. Outside, he heard the familiar sounds of the farm settling down for the night, the distant lowing of cattle, the barking of guard dogs, the melancholic song of the musician wrens. Everything seemed so serene and normal, contrasting violently with the storm raging inside him. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Francisco Tavares, who entered the office with a worried expression. "Your Excellency," he said, respectfully removing his hat, "forgive me for disturbing you at this hour, but I need to speak with you about a delicate matter." Eduardo indicated a chair, sensing the conversation would be painful. "Sit down, Francisco." "What is it?" The administrator remained standing, visibly uncomfortable. "Your Grace, I cannot pretend that I haven't noticed the special affection you have shown for my daughter Isabel." Eduardo's heart quickened. He had planned to speak with Francisco about his feelings for Isabel, but circumstances now made everything more complicated. "Francisco, Let me finish, please," the administrator interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "I am a simple man, sir, but I am neither blind nor foolish. I see how your eyes light up when Isabel appears. I see how she has blushed and smiled differently these past weeks." Eduardo remained silent, allowing Francisco to voice his concerns. "My daughter is a good girl, sir. Pure, honest, hard-working, but she was not raised to be a duchess." Francisco ran a hand through his graying hair. "She doesn't know how to behave in elegant drawing rooms. She doesn't speak French. She doesn't know the rules of high society. How could she possibly fill the position of a duke's wife?" Francisco's words dangerously echoed the arguments the noble visitors had used hours earlier, but coming from a concerned father, they carried a different weight. "Francisco," Eduardo said softly, "your daughter possesses qualities far more valuable than knowledge of social etiquette. I do not doubt that, Your Excellency. Isabel has a kind heart and a pure soul. But is that enough to face the cruel world of the aristocracy?" Francisco leaned forward. "Your Grace, I saw how that countess looked at my daughter yesterday, with contempt, as if Isabel were less than human. And if you marry her, Isabel will face that contempt for the rest of her life." Eduardo felt as if a blade had pierced his chest. Francisco was verbalizing his own deepest fears. "Furthermore," the administrator continued, "I heard from the staff that you received important visitors from the court today. I imagine they did not come just to have tea and admire our coffee groves." Francisco's astuteness did not surprise Eduardo. 20 years of managing the farm had taught him to read the undercurrents of politics and business. "They came to try to prevent my marriage to Isabel," Eduardo confirmed. "They threatened to cut my commercial contracts, to isolate me socially, to destroy my economic position." Francisco nodded sadly, as if he had expected that answer. "And are you willing to lose everything for my daughter?" The question hung in the air like a storm cloud. Eduardo stood up and walked to the window, looking at the distant lights of the Tavares' house. "I don't know, Francisco. For the first time in my life, I don't know if I have enough courage." "Your Grace," said Francisco, approaching him, "may I speak as a father and as a man who has known you since you were a boy?" Eduardo nodded. "You are a good and honorable man, but Isabel is my only daughter, and I could not bear to see her unhappy. If you marry her only to defy society, if you are not absolutely certain that you love her more than your social position, more than your fortune, more than your life, then for God's sake leave her in peace." Francisco's words struck Eduardo like lashes from a whip. Isabel's father was asking for the exact same thing the nobles had demanded, but for entirely opposite reasons. He was protecting his daughter instead of protecting social privileges. "She would be devastated if she found out about this conversation," Francisco continued. "Isabel believes that you truly love her, that you would face any obstacle for her. But I, as her father, need to be sure that you will not abandon her at the first serious storm." Eduardo turned to face Francisco's honest gaze. "And you believe I would be capable of abandoning her?" "I don't know, sir. Love is a beautiful feeling, but the fear of poverty, of social ruin, of losing prestige, those fears can be stronger than any passion." At that moment, soft footsteps echoed in the hallway. Isabel appeared at the office door carrying a tray with hot tea and homemade biscuits. "Papa?" she said, surprised to find him there. "I didn't know you were talking with Eduardo." The naturalness with which she pronounced the Duke's name, without formalities, revealed the intimacy that had grown between them. Francisco noticed, and his face darkened even more. "Isabel," Eduardo said, trying to hide the tension, "your father and I were just discussing farm business." "How nice," she smiled, placing the tray on the table. "I brought chamomile tea. I noticed you seemed worried during dinner." Isabel served the tea with her usual graceful gestures, but Eduardo perceived a shadow of apprehension in her eyes. She sensed that something was wrong, even without understanding exactly what. "My daughter," said Francisco, "it is getting late. Your mother is worried." "I'm coming, Papa." Isabel turned to Eduardo. "Eduardo, may I speak with you for a moment?" Alone? Francisco hesitated, but then nodded and left the office. When they were alone, Isabel approached Eduardo with a worried expression. "What is happening?" she asked directly. "Ever since that countess left and today's visitors arrived, you've been different, distant." Eduardo took her hands in his, feeling how they trembled slightly. "Isabel, my dear, sometimes the world conspires against our happiness, and I need to find out if I have enough strength to fight against that conspiracy." "What are you talking about?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Are you regretting loving me?" "Never," he answered quickly. "I would never regret that, but I fear I am not a brave enough man to protect you from the storms that are approaching." Isabel raised her hands and gently touched his face. "Eduardo, my love, you don't need to protect me from any storm. You just need to love me truly and trust in us both. And if our love costs me my fortune, what if we become poor? Then we will be poor together," she replied without hesitation. "I know how to work. I know how to keep a house. I know how to plant and harvest. I don't need luxuries to be happy. I just need you." The simplicity of that declaration moved Eduardo deeply. Here was a woman willing to give up any comfort for love, while he hesitated between his heart and convenience. "Isabel," he whispered, "you are braver than I am." "I'm not brave," she answered, moving closer. "I am just a woman in love who knows what she wants. And I want you, Eduardo, regardless of titles, riches, or the opinions of others." They kissed there in the office, a kiss that tasted of tears and uncertain promises. And when Isabel left to return home, Eduardo remained alone with the most important decision of his life, to find out if he would be able to honor a love as pure and courageous as the one he had just witnessed. The 48 hours were running out like sand in an hourglass, and Eduardo knew that when the deadline expired, there would be no turning back from whichever path he chose to follow. The dawn of the ultimatum's final day arrived shrouded in a thick mist, as if nature itself wished to conceal the drama unfolding at Fazenda Santa Isabel. Eduardo had not slept all night, pacing restlessly through the gardens as he wrestled with the decision that would forever change the course of his life. At 9 in the morning, as had been arranged, the carriages of the three nobles appeared again on the main road. This time they were accompanied by the elegant brougham of Countess Beatrice, who alighted from the vehicle, wrapped in blue silks and French perfume, smiling with the confidence of one who believed victory was at hand. Eduardo received them in the main drawing-room, dressed in his finest clothes and carrying himself with the dignity of his lineage, but inside his heart pounded like a war drum. "Good morning, gentlemen. Countess," he greeted them formally. "Eduardo, dear," said Beatrice, approaching with studied grace, "I hope you had a peaceful night reflecting on our conversation." The Baron de Santos once again occupied the central armchair, flanked by the other two nobles. Their faces expressed the confidence of men accustomed to getting what they wanted. "Eduardo," said the Baron, "the time for a decision has come. We hope you have understood the wisdom of our counsel." Eduardo remained standing by the window, gazing out at the gardens where Isabel usually gathered flowers in the morning. At that moment, he saw her appear on the path leading to the stables, her delicate figure silhouetted against the green of the coffee fields. "Before I give my answer," he said, "I would like to clarify something. You claim that a marriage between Isabel and me would harm our business with the European buyers. Are you absolutely certain of this?" The Viscount de Petropolis leaned forward. "Eduardo, our French and English partners are extremely conservative in social matters. They would not tolerate seeing one of their suppliers involved in matrimonial irregularities." "Irregularities?" Eduardo turned to face him. "You call the legal marriage between two people who love each other an irregularity? You know very well what we are talking about," the Count de Vasura interrupted impatiently. "Don't play the fool, Eduardo. The difference in class has always been and always will be an insurmountable obstacle in high society." Eduardo walked to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out some papers he had prepared during his sleepless night. "Gentlemen, during the night, I had the opportunity to review contracts and commercial correspondence from the last 5 years, and I made an interesting discovery." The four visitors exchanged apprehensive glances. "I discovered that my farm produces coffee of a quality superior to your properties, that my beans fetch prices 20% higher on the European market, and that, in fact, it is you who benefit from my commercial connections, not the other way around." The ensuing silence was as taut as a violin string about to snap. "Eduardo," said the Baron in a controlled voice, "do not be reckless. Economic power is measured not only by the quality of the product, but by political and social influence. Ah, yes, influence, Eduardo smiled humorlessly. The same influence you use to emotionally blackmail me, to threaten my happiness, to try to buy my soul. Beatrice stood up, alarmed. Eduardo, for God's sake, don't do something foolish on impulse. Think about what you are throwing away. Eduardo turned to her, and for the first time in 2 days his eyes shone with unshakable determination. Countess, I will tell you exactly what I am throwing away. Hypocrisy, falsehood, relationships based on self-interest and social convenience. I am throwing away a world where people's worth is measured by titles instead of character. And what do you intend to gain in return? The Count asked sarcastically. The most precious thing there is, the chance to be happy with a woman who truly loves me, not for my position or my fortune, but for the person I am. The Baron rose, his face red with indignation. Eduardo, if you persist in this mistake, consider yourself excluded from our social circle. Your contracts will be cancelled, your connections severed, your reputation ruined. So be it, Eduardo replied with a serenity that surprised everyone. I would rather be poor with dignity than rich with dishonor. Beatrice approached him one last time, her eyes flashing with fury and desperation. You will regret this, Eduardo. When the passion fades and you realize what you have lost, you will regret it bitterly. Perhaps, he admitted, but at least I will have a clear conscience, having chosen love over fear. The 4 visitors headed for their carriages with somber faces, defeated for the first time in years. Before getting into her brougham, Beatrice turned back one final time. I hope she is worth it, Eduardo. I hope this peasant girl makes up for everything you are losing for her. She is worth more than anything you can imagine, Eduardo replied. She is worth more than all of you put together. As the carriages disappeared around the bend in the road, Eduardo remained on the veranda, breathing deeply the fresh morning air. He felt like a man who had just been freed from invisible chains that had bound him for years. He headed to the stables where he knew he would find Isabel tending to the animals. She was brushing Esperanza when he appeared, and she looked up with the smile that lit up her face every time she saw him. Good morning, my love, she said. How did you sleep? Eduardo approached and took her in his arms, kissing her with renewed passion. I spent the night discovering that you are more important to me than any wealth in this world, he said. I have just refused a millionaire marriage proposal and likely lost 60% of my annual income. Isabel stopped brushing the mare, alarmed. Eduardo, why did you do that? Because, he said, kneeling right there on the stable floor, I cannot live without you. Because I discovered that I would rather be poor by your side than rich without you. Isabel Tavares, will you marry me, knowing that we will face difficulties, that we will be criticized by society, that we may have to fight to maintain our prosperity? Isabel knelt before him, tears of happiness streaming down her face. Eduardo, my love, yes, 1,000 times yes. I don't care what we face as long as it is by your side. And there in the stable, scented with hay and true love, they sealed with a kiss the decision that would change their lives forever. Eduardo had chosen his heart over convenience, happiness over social security. As he later told Francisco when he formally asked for Isabel's hand, I lost business to save my soul and my heart. And I do not regret it, nor will I ever. The true adventure of their lives was just beginning, but Eduardo knew he had made the only decision that would allow him to look at himself in the mirror every morning with self-respect and his dignity intact. Autumn gilded the leaves of the eucalyptus trees when the day of Eduardo and Isabel's wedding arrived. Defying all expectations of high society, which had anticipated a discreet and almost shameful ceremony, Eduardo decided to celebrate their union with the dignity it deserved. The church of San Juan Bautista, in the neighboring town of Queluz, was chosen for the ceremony. It was a colonial temple of soapstone with bell towers that rose majestically against the blue May sky. Eduardo had it decorated with thousands of white and red roses, creating a scene of beauty that rivaled any wedding at the court. Isabel awoke on her wedding morning with butterflies dancing in her stomach. Donna Maria had spent the night making the final adjustments to the dress that would be the glory of that day. A French lace model that Eduardo had specially brought from Rio de Janeiro, with a long train and a tulle veil hand-embroidered with silver thread. My daughter, said Donna Maria, arranging Isabel's hair in elaborate buns adorned with fresh flowers, you are more beautiful than a fairy tale princess. Isabel looked at herself in the antique mirror that had belonged to Eduardo's mother. The dress transformed her into a dreamlike vision. The lace delicately embraced her figure, The modest neckline highlighted her fair décolletage, and the full skirt billowed like clouds when she moved. In her hands she would carry a bouquet of roses from the garden she herself had restored. "I'm nervous, Mama," Isabel confessed. "What if I don't know how to behave as a duchess should?" "My dear," Donna Maria kissed her daughter's forehead, "you have something that no social protocol can teach, a pure and kind heart. That is worth more than all the etiquette manuals in the world." Eduardo waited at the church, dressed in the full dress uniform of the National Guard, decorated with his family's medals. When Isabel appeared at the church portal, walking slowly on Francisco's arm, Eduardo felt as if his heart would burst with emotion. She seemed to float over the uneven stone floor of the church, her dress shining under the light of the candles and stained glass windows. The guests, mostly neighbors, farm employees, and simple folk from the region, sighed in admiration as she passed. Bishop Dom Joaquim, specially invited to officiate the ceremony, opened the prayer book with solemnity. "My dear brothers and sisters," he said, his voice echoing through the stone vaults, "we are gathered here today to witness the sacred union between Eduardo de Bragança y Silva and Isabel Tavares, a union that teaches us that true love transcends social barriers and finds its strength in the purity of feelings." Eduardo and Isabel exchanged the traditional vows, but their words carried a genuine emotion that touched everyone present. When Eduardo said, "I take this woman as my lawful wife," his voice choked with emotion. When Isabel repeated the same words, tears of happiness shone in her eyes like diamonds. The exchange of rings was a moment of touching beauty. Eduardo had the jewels crafted from gold extracted from his own lands, a symbol that this love was born and had grown in the blessed soil of the farm they would now share as a couple. "What God has joined together, let no man separate," declared the bishop, sealing the union with his apostolic blessing. The reception at the farm was a celebration that would forever remain in the memory of all who attended. Eduardo had white canvas tents set up in the gardens, decorated with garlands of wildflowers. Tables covered with linen cloths offered delicacies prepared by the best cooks in the region: roasted suckling pig, grilled pacu, milk and guava sweets, and corn and cassava treats. An orchestra from Rio de Janeiro played waltzes and polkas, while the guests danced on a wooden platform built especially for the occasion. Eduardo and Isabel opened the ball with a waltz he had personally chosen, "Sobre as Ondas" by Juventino Rosas. "My Lady Duchess," Eduardo whispered as they danced, provoking delighted laughter from Isabel. "I still can't believe this is real," she replied. "I feel like I'm going to wake up at any moment." "It is real, my love, and it is only the beginning of our story." The party lasted late into the night, with fireworks illuminating the starry sky of the Paraíba Valley. When the last guests finally departed, Eduardo and Isabel walked together through the fragrant gardens, she still in her wedding dress, he with his elegant tailcoat unbuttoned. "Where are we going for our honeymoon?" Isabel asked playfully. Eduardo pointed to the main house, illuminated by its welcoming windows, to the most romantic place in the world, our home. And indeed, they spent their honeymoon right there on the farm, discovering the intimacy of marriage and making plans for the future. Eduardo showed Isabel the account books, taught her about the coffee business, and she revealed to him her knowledge of sustainable agriculture, learned from observing nature. "Look here," Isabel said one morning, pointing to a degraded area of the property. "If we plant legumes in this section during the fallow period, they will naturally enrich the soil. Then we can rotate it with coffee, increasing productivity without depleting the land." Eduardo was impressed by his wife's practical wisdom. Isabel possessed a natural intuition for agriculture that perfectly complemented his theoretical knowledge. Together, they developed innovative cultivation methods that soon caught the attention of neighboring landowners. The farm began to prosper in a way previously unimaginable, proving that Eduardo had made the right choice, not only in love, but also in business. One afternoon, 3 months after the wedding, Eduardo found Isabel in the rose garden, caressing her belly with a radiant expression. "Eduardo," she said, lifting her shining eyes, "I have wonderful news to give you." He approached quickly, sensing what she was about to reveal. "We're going to have a baby," she announced, her voice trembling with emotion. Eduardo took her in his arms and spun her around among the blooming rose bushes, both laughing with pure happiness. Life was presenting them with a new blessing, perfectly crowning the love they had chosen to defend against all odds. On that golden autumn afternoon, amidst the scent of roses and the promise of a new life growing in the womb of the woman he loved, Eduardo understood that he had found true wealth. It was not in coffers filled with gold, but in the ability to love and be loved truly. And as the sun set over the coffee plantations of Fazenda Santa Isabel, painting the sky with colors that seemed to celebrate that triumphant love, Eduardo and Isabel walked hand in hand towards the future they would build together, brick by brick, kiss by kiss, dream by dream. The spring of 1848 brought extraordinary transformations to Fazenda Santa Isabel. Isabel, now 6 months pregnant, moved through the gardens with a maternal grace that made her even more beautiful. Her rounded belly was constantly caressed by Eduardo's protective hands, who never tired of talking to the baby growing inside. "Good morning, little prince," he would say every morning, kissing his wife's belly. "Today, Papa is going to show you the most beautiful coffee plantations in the Paraíba Valley." Isabel would smile with that infinite tenderness of pregnant women, her hands intertwining with his over the life pulsing within her. "And what if it's a girl?" she would ask playfully. "Then she will be the most spoiled princess in all of Imperial Brazil," Eduardo would reply, covering her face with kisses. The farm prospered like never before. The innovative agricultural methods they developed together had resulted in an exceptional harvest, coffee beans of superior quality that fetched record prices on the European market. Ironically, French and English buyers lined up to purchase the product from Fazenda Santa Isabel, proving that technical competence was worth more than social prejudice. Eduardo had also implemented improvements in the living conditions of the workers, following Isabel's suggestions, who intimately knew the needs of each family. They built new houses for the employees, a school for the children, and a small hospital where Isabel attended to both people and animals with her knowledge of natural medicine. "The Duchess has blessed hands," the women of the farm would say, watching how Isabel healed wounds, soothed fevers, and assisted in difficult births. One September morning, Francisco arrived at the main house with a look of astonishment, carrying an official correspondence sealed with the imperial crest. "Your Grace," he said, still not believing what he saw, "this letter arrived from the court. It bears the Emperor's coat of arms." Eduardo opened the letter with growing curiosity as Isabel approached, intrigued. As he read, his eyes widened in surprise. "What does it say?" asked Isabel, noticing the emotion on her husband's face. "His Imperial Majesty Dom Pedro II," Eduardo read aloud, "is coming to inspect the farms of the Paraíba Valley next week, and he has chosen our property as an example of modern and progressive agriculture in Brazil." Isabel brought her hands to her face, incredulous. "The Emperor coming here, to our farm." "Not just coming," Eduardo continued, still absorbing the magnitude of the news, "but citing our property as a model to be followed by other producers. Apparently, reports on our innovative methods have reached His Majesty's ears." The preparation for the imperial visit transformed the farm into a hive of activity. Donna Josefa coordinated the cleaning and decoration of the main house, while Francisco supervised the maintenance of roads and pastures. Isabel, despite her advanced pregnancy, insisted on personally preparing the gardens that would receive the emperor. "My dear," said Eduardo, concerned, "you should rest more. You don't need to exert yourself so much." "Eduardo," she replied with sweet determination, "this moment is very important for us. I want everything to be perfect to receive His Majesty." On the appointed day, the imperial entourage appeared on the main avenue like a golden procession. Elegant carriages escorted by the imperial guard, flags fluttering in the wind, horsemen in impeccable uniforms. Dom Pedro II himself, with his characteristic beard and majestic bearing, alighted from the main carriage, smiling benevolently. Eduardo and Isabel awaited on the porch of the main house, she wearing an elegant light blue dress that highlighted her maternal condition, he in a full-dress uniform. When they made the formal curtsies, the emperor surprised everyone with his simplicity. "Duke Eduardo," said Dom Pedro II, "it is a pleasure to personally meet the couple who has been revolutionizing agriculture in our country, and you must be the famous Duchess Isabel, about whom I have heard extraordinary reports." Isabel blushed deeply, but replied with natural dignity, "Your Imperial Majesty honors me too much. I am just a woman who loves the land and the beings that live on it." The emperor toured the farm throughout the day, showing genuine interest in the methods developed by Eduardo and Isabel. In the small veterinary hospital, he watched, fascinated, as Isabel treated an injured calf using medicinal herbs and affection. "Extraordinary," commented Dom Pedro II. "You possess knowledge that would rival any veterinarian trained in Europe." In the school they had built for the workers' children, the emperor talked at length with the children, impressed by the level of education they were receiving. "This is the future of Brazil," he said to Eduardo. "Education, technological innovation, and respect for the workers. You are building a model of civilization." During the gala dinner served in the main house, the emperor made an announcement that would forever mark the lives of Eduardo and Isabel. "Duke Eduardo de Bragança e Silva," said Dom Pedro II, rising solemnly, "in recognition of the services rendered to the agricultural development of our country, for the innovative methods you have implemented on your property, and for the example of social responsibility you offer to other farmers, I have the honor of appointing you Royal Counselor of the Empire of Brazil." The room erupted in applause as Eduardo knelt to receive the imperial decoration. Isabel, seated beside him with her hands on her rounded belly, wept with emotion and pride. "And to you, Duchess Isabel," the emperor continued, "I grant the title of Dame of the Imperial Order in recognition of your charitable works and your knowledge of natural medicine that so greatly benefits our rural population." When the ceremony ended and the imperial entourage departed, Eduardo and Isabel remained on the veranda, contemplating the stars that shone over their blessed lands. "We did it, my dear," said Eduardo, embracing his wife. "We proved that true love and honest work can overcome any prejudice." Isabel rested her head on his chest, feeling the baby move as if it too were celebrating their victory. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. "Our family is growing, our property is prospering, and we have a bright future ahead of us." And they were right. The imperial recognition opened doors to new commercial contracts, technical partnerships, and opportunities to expand their revolutionary methods to other regions. Fazenda Santa Isabel became a required destination for agriculture students and rural landowners interested in modernizing their techniques. More importantly than anything, they proved that true nobility is not inherited. It is built with character, work, and love for one's fellow man. Eduardo and Isabel had overcome not only the prejudices of society, but also their own insecurities, emerging stronger and more united than ever. On that starry night, embracing on the veranda of the house where they built their happiness, they knew that the best of their lives was yet to come. The winter of 1849 arrived at Fazenda Santa Isabel, bringing with it the blessings of a complete and prosperous family. Isabel held João Eduardo, her 3-month-old son, in her arms, as she gazed from the bedroom window at the gardens covered in morning frost, which sparkled like diamonds on the grass. The baby had been born on a spring dawn, when the rose bushes were in full bloom, and the air was perfumed with the sweetness of the flowers that symbolized his parents' love. Eduardo had witnessed the birth, holding Isabel's hand, and when he heard his son's first cry, he too cried with pure emotion. "He is perfect," Eduardo had whispered, receiving the baby in his trembling hands. "Perfect, like his mother." Now, watching Isabel cradle their son while humming a sweet melody, Eduardo felt his heart overflow with gratitude. He had found not only love, but also a completeness he had never imagined possible. Fazenda Santa Isabel had become a benchmark throughout the Paraíba Valley. Landowners from other regions came to study the innovative methods that Eduardo and Isabel had developed, and their techniques began to be replicated on properties in Minas Gerais, São Paulo, and even Rio Grande do Sul. "Papa," Isabel said one afternoon while breastfeeding João Eduardo on the jasmine-scented veranda, "look how many carriages have arrived today. There must be at least 20 rural landowners wanting to learn about our methods." Francisco approached with a proud smile on his lips. The transformation he had undergone in the last 2 years was impressive. From a simple administrator, he had become a respected consultant, traveling to various farms to teach the techniques he had helped develop. "My daughter," he said, caressing his grandson's little head, "you have created something that goes far beyond a prosperous farm. You have created a new way of seeing agriculture, of treating the land and the workers." Eduardo approached and sat beside his wife, watching their son nurse with the voracious hunger of a healthy newborn. "Isabel, do you remember what you told me when we first met? That the animals speak to us when we learn to listen?" "I remember," she smiled, adjusting the baby in her arms. "Well, I have learned that the land also speaks. And it told us that it was tired of being mistreated, exploited without care. That's why it responded so well when we began to treat it with respect and affection." Isabel lifted her eyes to meet his, still shining with the love that had grown and matured over the months. "And the workers also spoke," she added, "when we gave them better houses, education for their children, medical care. They reciprocated with dedication and joy in their work. Donna Josefa appeared on the veranda, carrying a tray with tea and homemade biscuits, her wrinkled face illuminated by the happiness of seeing the family she had helped raise so prosperous and united. "Your Grace, my Lady Duchess," she said, "another invitation has arrived from Rio de Janeiro. The Minister of Agriculture wants you to present your methods at an imperial conference." Eduardo took the letter, but his attention was divided between the baby dozing in Isabel's arms and the gardens where dozens of visitors were admiring the sustainable cultivation techniques. "We will go, of course," he said, "but our place is here in this land that welcomed us and allowed us to flourish." That afternoon, Eduardo walked alone to the rose garden, where it all began. The rose bushes planted by his mother had multiplied, creating a fragrant paradise that now extended along the entire side of the main house. Each variety told a story, the red ones of initial passion, the white ones of the purity of love, the yellow ones of joy achieved. He sat on the bench where he had made his first declaration of love to Isabel and closed his eyes, breathing in the sweet scent that transported him to that magical day. It all seemed like a dream, the impossible love that had become reality, the farm that had prospered beyond all expectations, the healthy son who guaranteed the family's continuity. "Thank you," he whispered to the wind that swayed the rose bushes. He didn't know exactly to whom he was directing his gratitude, whether to God, to destiny, or to life itself, but he felt the need to express the emotion overflowing from his chest. When he returned to the house, he found Isabel in the nursery they had prepared with so much care. João Eduardo slept peacefully in the carved mahogany crib that had belonged to the Bragança e Silva family for 3 generations, while she organized the little clothes that Donna Maria sewed with skill. "What are you thinking about, my dear?" Eduardo asked, hugging her from behind. "About the future," she replied, leaning against his chest. "About how our son will grow up on this farm, knowing every tree, every animal, every worker. About how he will learn that it doesn't matter where we come from, but what we do with the opportunities life gives us." Eduardo kissed her neck, inhaling the soft scent that always drove him wild. "And what future do you imagine for him?" "I want him to be a good man like his father," Isabel said, turning in his arms. "To respect the land, love the animals, treat the workers well. To know that true wealth is not in coffers, but in the hearts of the people we love." That night, after João Eduardo had fallen asleep and the farm had plunged into the silence perfumed by night-blooming flowers, Eduardo and Isabel sat in the library where he used to work. The walls were covered with letters of thanks from other farmers, certificates of recognition from agricultural institutions, and photographs documenting the property's transformations. "Isabel," said Eduardo, taking her hands in his, "we have built something bigger than ourselves. Our farm has become a symbol that it is possible to prosper while treating the land and people well. And our love has become proof that the heart recognizes no social barriers," she added. "How many letters have we received from young couples who were inspired by our story to fight for their own impossible dreams?" Eduardo smiled, remembering the dozens of letters that arrived every week, young women in love with men from different classes, sons of farmers who wanted to marry the daughters of tenants, young nobles charmed by simple but special people. "We became symbols without meaning to," he said. "And that makes me think, what responsibility do we have to all these people who see in us the hope that true love can overcome any obstacle?" Isabel stood up and walked to the window overlooking the rose garden, now bathed in silvery moonlight. "The responsibility to continue being examples," she replied, "to show that we chose well, that our happiness was not built on illusions but on work, mutual respect and true love." Eduardo joined her at the window, both watching the night landscape that now belonged not only to them, but also to the sun sleeping peacefully upstairs. "Do you know what I am most proud of?" he asked. "What?" "That our story is still being written. Each day brings new pages, new chapters, new reasons to love this life we've built together even more." And he was right. Far from being an ending, that moment represented the beginning of a golden era for Fazenda Santa Isabel, a time when love would be not just a feeling, but a transformative force capable of influencing future generations. But neither Eduardo nor Isabel imagined that the greatest challenge of their lives was yet to come, a test that would put to the trial not only their love, but also their ability to forgive and start anew when all seemed lost. The spring of 1850 brought winds of change that would blow over Fazenda Santa Isabel like an unexpected storm. João Eduardo had just celebrated his first birthday. and the property had reached the peak of its prosperity when news arrived that would shake the foundations of the happiness built by Eduardo and Isabel. It was a September morning, scented by the jacaranda blossoms that adorned the main avenue, when Francisco burst into the main house with a look of panic. His hands trembled as he held a crumpled telegram, and the sweat on his brow was not just from the morning sun's heat. "Your Grace," he said, his voice choked, "this urgent message arrived from Rio de Janeiro. It's about the export contracts." Eduardo was in his office reviewing the harvest's account books, while Isabel played with Juan Eduardo on the wool rug that covered the waxed plank floor. The baby was crawling happily among the wooden toys that Francisco had carved with his own hands. "What happened, Francisco?" Eduardo asked, noticing the administrator's agitation. "The French buyers have cancelled all the contracts," Francisco said, handing over the telegram. They claim they received compromising information about our social reputation." The silence that followed was as thick as a storm cloud. Isabel stopped playing with her son and looked up, sensing the gravity of the moment. Eduardo read the telegram twice, his expression gradually darkening. "Regret to inform immediate cancellation of export contracts for 1850 harvest. Have received reports questioning social integrity of supplier. Awaiting clarification before future renewal. Cordially, Maison Dubois and Fils." Isabel rose slowly, taking Juan Eduardo in her arms as if to protect him from an invisible threat. "Eduardo," she said in a controlled voice, "what does this mean exactly?" Eduardo walked to the window, looking out at the coffee fields that stretched to the horizon. Those contracts represented 80% of his annual revenue. Without them, the farm would face serious financial difficulties. "It means someone is sabotaging our business," he replied, his jaw tight. "Someone who has not given up on destroying us." As if his words were a prophecy, Donna Josefa appeared at the office door carrying a silver tray on which rested an envelope sealed with red wax. "Your Grace," she said, "a messenger brought this from the court. He said it was extremely urgent." Eduardo opened the envelope and took out a letter written on expensive letterhead. As he read, his expression transformed into a mask of controlled fury. "It's from Countess Beatrice," he announced, his voice icy. "She wants to meet with us tomorrow for a clarifying conversation about commercial misunderstandings." Isabel came closer, the baby still in her arms, and read over her husband's shoulder. The letter was written in a seemingly cordial tone, but was laden with threatening innuendos. "My dear Eduardo and Isabel," the letter read, "I deeply regret any inconveniences that may have arisen in your business. As you know, certain information about social irregularities has reached the ears of our European partners. Perhaps we can find a mutually beneficial solution to this unpleasant situation. I await you tomorrow at 3 o'clock at Fazenda São Bento for important clarifications. With esteem, Countess Beatriz de Moraes." Francisco slammed his fist on the table, his usual cordiality replaced by indignation. "That woman hasn't given up. 2 years later, she's still trying to destroy your happiness." Eduardo folded the letter slowly, his mind working to assess the available options. "Isabel," he said, "perhaps it would be better if you didn't come to this meeting. It could be unpleasant." "Eduardo," she replied firmly, "we are husband and wife. We face everything together, remember." The next day, Eduardo and Isabel drove to Fazenda São Bento in a silent carriage. Juan Eduardo had been left in the care of Donna Josefa, who promised to protect him as if he were her own grandson. The road wound through hills covered in coffee plantations, but neither of them had eyes for the beauty of the landscape. Fazenda São Bento was a smaller property than Eduardo's, but still impressive with its colonial-style main house and well-kept gardens. Beatriz awaited them in the main drawing room, elegantly dressed in black, as if in mourning, or preparing someone else's. "Eduardo, dear, and the charming Isabel," she greeted with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "What a joy to see you again after so long." Eduardo and Isabel remained standing, refusing the offered seats. "Let's dispense with the courtesies, Countess," Eduardo said coldly. "What do you want from us?" Beatriz walked to a side table and poured herself a glass of sherry, her movements calculated to create suspense. "Straight to the point, as always," she said. "Very well. Do you remember our last conversation 2 years ago, when I warned you about the consequences of certain inappropriate romantic choices?" "We remember your threats, if that's what you're talking about," Isabel replied with dignity. "Threats?" Beatrice raised an eyebrow. "My dear, I merely offered friendly advice you chose to ignore." Eduardo took a step forward, instinctively protecting Isabel. "Get to the point, Beatrice. What do you want?" The mask of cordiality finally fell from the Countess's face, revealing an expression of calculated coldness. "I want Eduardo to divorce you," she said, fixing her eyes on Isabel, "and marry me. In return, I will ensure that all commercial contracts are restored and that his reputation in high society is rehabilitated." The silence that followed was charged with electric tension. "And if we refuse?" Eduardo asked. "Then prepare for ruin," Beatrice replied without blinking. "Not only will the French cancel their contracts, the English, the Germans, and even the domestic buyers will receive detailed information about the social inadequacy of your union." Isabel felt her legs weaken, but she stood firm. "What information would that be?" Beatrice smiled cruelly. "Oh, my dear, you can't imagine what I can invent. Stories of dubious origins, inappropriate behavior, financial irregularities. Imagination is fertile when it comes to destroying reputations." Eduardo grabbed Isabel's arm, feeling her tremble. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Beatrice took a bundle of letters from her purse. "Here are copies of the correspondence I have already sent to our main business partners. Detailed reports about, let's say, the inappropriate behavior of a certain duchess of humble origin." Isabel read over Eduardo's shoulder. The letters were filled with cruel lies, insinuations about her past, suggestions of immoral behavior, fabrications about irregularities in the farm's administration. "This is defamation," Eduardo said in a controlled voice. "This is war," Beatrice replied. "A war that you can end right now by accepting my proposal." Isabel lifted her chin with a dignity that impressed even the Countess. "And what exactly would your proposal be?" "Simple. Eduardo obtains an annulment of the marriage claiming, let's say, irregularities in the original process. He marries me in a discreet ceremony. You, my dear, receive a generous sum to start a new life in another province, far from here." The proposal was so cynical it made Eduardo feel nauseous. "And our son?" Isabel asked, her voice trembling. "Ah, yes, the child," Beatrice waved dismissively. "Eduardo can visit him occasionally. After all, he is of Braganza y Silva blood." Eduardo saw red. In a burst of controlled fury, he approached Beatrice until they were face to face. "Never," he said in a low, dangerous voice. "I would never separate from Isabel or my son. I would rather lose everything than lose them." "How romantic," Beatrice said sarcastically. "But when you are in poverty, when you can no longer maintain the farm, when you see your son in need, perhaps you will change your mind." Isabel took Eduardo's hand, intertwining her fingers in a silent demonstration of unity. "Countess," she said with impressive calm, "you can destroy our business, ruin our reputation, but you cannot destroy our love. And in the end, that is what matters." Beatrice looked at the united couple before her, and for the first time since she began her revenge, she felt a pang of doubt. There was something in their union that seemed indestructible, something that all her social and financial weapons could not touch. "You have 1 week to decide," she finally said. "After that, the remaining letters will be sent, and there will be no turning back." Eduardo and Isabel left Fazenda São Bento in silence, each lost in dark thoughts. The road back to Fazenda Santa Isabel had never seemed so long, and for the first time in 2 years, they faced the real possibility of losing everything they had fought for. But it would be precisely this crisis that would test the true strength of their love and reveal what they were truly capable of when they fought united against adversity. The week following Beatrice's ultimatum was the most difficult Eduardo and Isabel had faced since they met. The days dragged on as heavy as lead, while the nights brought insomnia and painful discussions about the uncertain future that awaited them. Eduardo locked himself in his office, calculating and recalculating the farm's finances. Without the European contracts, they would have enough revenue to maintain operations for 2 years at most. After that, they would have to sell land, lay off workers, and abandon the social projects they had implemented. Isabel spent hours in the rose garden with João Eduardo in her lap, humming melancholic tunes as she watched the flowers that had witnessed so many happy moments. The baby, with the sensitivity of young children, cried more than usual, as if sensing the tension that hung over the house. It was on one of these agonizing afternoons that Dona Josefa brought an unexpected visitor, Father Antonio, the old priest who had baptized Isabel and watched her grow up. "My child," said the priest, embracing Isabel with paternal affection, "I heard about the difficulties you are facing. I came to offer not only prayers but also an idea." Eduardo joined them in the garden, respecting the old priest who had always been a revered figure in the region. "Father Antonio," he greeted, "you are always welcome in our home." "Your Grace, I heard that a wicked person is trying to destroy your happiness using lies and blackmail," the priest said directly. "But I also know that you have something that person has never possessed, the respect and love of many good people." Isabel looked up, intrigued. "What do you mean, Father?" "My child, for the past 2 weeks I have been talking with local farmers, town merchants, rural workers. Everyone is outraged by what is happening to you. Many want to help, but they don't know how." Eduardo frowned. "Help how?" "By organizing a defense," replied the priest, his eyes shining. "Preparing letters of recommendation, testimonies about your character, documents that prove the falsity of the accusations circulating." That night, the main house of Fazenda Santa Isabel was transformed into a veritable campaign headquarters. Francisco coordinated the arrival of visitors who came from neighboring properties from the town and even from distant farms whose owners knew the exemplary reputation of Eduardo and Isabel. The Baron of Queluz, a respected and influential landowner, was the first to arrive. "Eduardo," he said, shaking his hand firmly, "I heard what that woman is doing. It is a disgrace to our class. I came to offer my personal testimony about the exceptional character of you both." Comendador Santos, a wealthy coffee merchant, brought documents proving the honest transactions he had maintained with Fazenda Santa Isabel for years. "I have never seen a better managed property nor more upright people," he declared. "Any accusation against you is pure envy and malice." Donna Mercedes, an influential widow from the local society, arrived accompanied by other ladies of the regional high society. "Isabel, my dear," she said, embracing the young duchess, "we all admire your work with the poor and sick of the region. These slanders are the inventions of a resentful woman." For 3 days the farm received dozens of visitors. Each brought letters, documents and testimonies that attested to the couple's impeccable reputation. Francisco organized everything methodically, creating an impressive dossier of support. But the biggest surprise came on the 4th day, in an imperial carriage that Eduardo recognized immediately. It was Dom Pedro II in person, accompanied only by 2 aides, on a completely informal visit. "Your Majesty?" Eduardo and Isabel made the formal curtsies, surprised by the unexpected visit. "Dispense with the formalities," said the Emperor, smiling kindly. "I have come here as a friend, not as a sovereign." Dom Pedro II walked through the gardens he had so admired on his previous visit, observing with satisfaction the improvements that had been implemented. "I have heard of the difficulties you face," he said directly, "and I have come to tell you that you have my unconditional support." Eduardo felt a lump in his throat. "Your Majesty, we would not want you to get involved in our personal problems." "Eduardo," the Emperor said firmly, "you represent the best of Brazil. Integrity, hard work, social progress. I will not allow you to be destroyed by petty intrigues." Dom Pedro II took an envelope sealed with the imperial crest from his coat. "Here is a letter of recommendation addressed to the main European coffee buyers. In it, I personally endorse the quality of your products and the integrity of your character." Isabel began to cry with emotion, unable to speak. "But more important than my letter," the Emperor continued, "is the support you have garnered from your own community. This proves that you have built something solid, based on mutual respect and honest work." On the last day of the deadline given by Beatriz, Eduardo and Isabel went once again to Fazenda São Bento. This time, however, they did not go as intimidated victims, but as people strengthened by the support of hundreds of friends and the certainty that they had made the right choices. Beatriz awaited them in the same drawing room, elegantly dressed, with a confident smile on her lips. "So?" she asked without preamble. "What is your decision?" Eduardo placed a leather folder containing all the documents collected during the week on the table. "Our decision is to fight," he said calmly, "and here are the weapons for that fight." Beatriz opened the folder with curiosity, and as she leafed through the papers, her expression changed from confidence to surprise, then to concern, and finally to something close to panic. There were letters from dozens of rural landowners, attesting to the character of Eduardo and Isabel, commercial documents proving the honesty of their transactions, medical testimonies about Isabel's charitable works, and at the end, the imperial letter that fully endorsed the couple's reputation. This changes nothing," Beatrice stammered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "It changes everything," Isabel replied with serenity. "You can spread lies, but the truth always wins in the end." Eduardo leaned over the table, Beatrice, you have a choice to make. You can continue this petty war and be completely defeated, or you can accept that you have lost and try to rebuild your life with dignity. For the first time in 2 years, Beatrice looked like an ordinary, vulnerable woman, stripped of the social weapons she had always used. I loved you, Eduardo," she whispered. "I still do." "No, Beatrice," he replied with unexpected gentleness. "You never loved me. You loved my position, my wealth, the prestige that a marriage to me would bring. True love does not try to destroy the happiness of the person one loves." Isabel approached Beatrice with genuine compassion. "Countess, you can still find happiness, but you need to stop looking for it in the misfortune of others." Beatrice looked at those two faces that reflected sincerity and compassion, and something inside her broke. All the masks fell away, revealing a tired, bitter woman who had wasted years of her life on a revenge that had only brought more emptiness to her heart. I will withdraw the accusations," she finally said. "And I will apologize to the European buyers for the incorrect information." Eduardo and Isabel exchanged a look of relief and victory. "Thank you, Beatrice," said Eduardo. "It is the right decision." When they left Fazenda São Bento for the last time, the golden late afternoon sun bathed the coffee fields in a light of redemption. Eduardo and Isabel walked hand in hand towards their carriage, knowing that they had not only won a battle, but had proven to themselves and the world the indestructible strength of their love. "We did it," Isabel whispered. "We did it again." "We did it because we were together," Eduardo replied. "And because we learned that true love is not just a feeling, it is also courage, work, and faith in the future." When they arrived at Fazenda Santa Isabel, they found João Eduardo taking his first steps in the rose garden, supported by the loving hands of Dona Josefa. It was as if even the baby wanted to celebrate the family's victory. "Look at that," exclaimed the governess. "Our little prince decided to walk today of all days." Eduardo and Isabel ran to their son, who smiled and held out his chubby little arms towards his parents. When they picked him up, surrounded by the scent of the roses that had witnessed so many joys and sorrows, they knew that this moment represented more than a personal victory. It was the triumph of love over hate, of truth over lies, of hope over despair. That night, as João Eduardo slept peacefully in his crib, and Fazenda Santa Isabel rested under a starry sky that seemed to bless those prosperous lands, Eduardo and Isabel sat on the veranda of the main house, watching the gardens perfumed by the night jasmine. "Eduardo," said Isabel, her head resting on his shoulder, "what did we learn from all this?" He kissed her hair, breathing in the sweet scent that had always filled him with peace. "We learned that true love is not just a promise of happiness," he replied. "It is also the strength to face any storm, the courage to defend what we believe in, and the wisdom to forgive even those who tried to destroy us." Isabel lifted her face to look at him in the starlight. "And we learned that we are stronger together than we ever would be alone." They kissed there, on the veranda, scented by jasmines and roses that symbolized their journey. It was a kiss that tasted of victory and eternity, sealing not only their love, but also the certainty that they had built something indestructible, a family based on respect, a prosperous property based on honest work, and a legacy of love that would inspire future generations. Fazenda Santa Isabel would awaken the next day even more beautiful, more prosperous, more full of hope. The gardens would continue to bloom, the coffee fields to produce beans of exceptional quality, the workers to live with dignity, and the Bragança e Silva family to grow in love and wisdom. And always, always, the rose bushes in the special garden would continue to bloom, silent but eternal witnesses to a love that proved to be stronger than any adversity, more lasting than any wealth, and truer than any social convention. Eduardo and Isabel had discovered the secret to happiness. It was not in noble titles, accumulated fortunes, or society's approval, but in the ability to truly love and be loved in return, building together a future based on eternal values that no storm could ever destroy.